She mispronounced a dish. He laughed. But what she said next silenced the entire room. Inside the glittering walls of Maison Belle, an upscale French restaurant nestled in Manhattan, a quiet storm was brewing. Dressed in her crisp white blouse and black apron, Ava Coleman, a poised black waitress, approached a table of wealthy businessmen led by arrogant billionaire Preston Whitman. As Preston butchered the name of a French dish, loud enough to entertain his companions, Ava gently corrected him with flawless pronunciation. The laughter that followed was sharp, mocking. But Ava stood still, serene, dignified. What no one at that table knew was that behind her calm smile was a woman once hailed at the Point, Geneva International Forum, for her speech on multilingual diplomacy. A woman who'd studied at Sciences Po in Paris. A woman who had given up a brilliant future to raise her orphaned sister after losing both parents. And Preston, the man who thought she was just a server? That night, one of his European partners recognized Ava and publicly praised her academic brilliance and global impact. The mood shifted. Preston's face burned with shame as the powerful men around him turned their admiration toward the woman he mocked. In that moment, Ava didn't need revenge. Her knowledge had already spoken, and the world finally listened. The clinking of crystal glasses and soft murmur of classical piano filled Maison Belle, the A-de-Joe kind of restaurant where power meets luxury. But beneath the chandeliers and perfectly folded napkins, something more profound was about to unfold. Ava Coleman, a black waitress in her late 20s, glided from table to table with the grace of someone who had long since mastered the art of being unseen. Until that night, when a billionaire's cruel joke became the spark that ignited her transformation. Ava approached the table of Preston Whitman, a Wall Street mogul known as much for his ruthless deals as for his arrogance. Holding the French menu like a weapon, he smirked and deliberately mispronounced a signature dish. "I'll have the foie gras with, bouillabaisse," he announced, eliciting laughter from his well-dressed companions. Ava, steady and soft spoken, corrected him with perfect pronunciation. "Foie gras with bouillabaisse, sir." More laughter followed, mocking, piercing. But Ava didn't flinch. She simply nodded and walked away. To them, she was just a waitress. But none of them knew that Ava had once been a top student at Sciences Po in Paris. That she had given a standing ovation speech at the Geneva Forum on Multilingual Diplomacy. That she was fluent in 5 languages. That she'd given it all up when tragedy called her home. Years earlier, Ava had been on the cusp of an extraordinary career. Her days were filled with intellectual debates and international dreams. But when both her parents died suddenly, her mother from cancer, her father from a stroke, she made the heartbreaking choice to return to New York and raise her younger sister Naomi. The scholarships, the thesis, the dreams, all paused. In their place came double shifts, bills, and quiet sacrifices. Back at the restaurant, Preston's joke lingered in the air. But fate was not done. At the same table, one of the VIP guests, Jean-Luc Moreau, a renowned French investor, narrowed his eyes at Ava's voice. Moments later, he asked gently, "Excuse me, are you Ava Coleman, the speaker from the Geneva conference?" The room fell silent. Ava hesitated, stunned. "Yes, I am," she replied quietly. Jean-Luc turned to the others, his voice warm and filled with admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen, this woman before you is not just a server. She delivered one of the most powerful talks I've ever heard on the role of language in diplomacy. I remember her insight, her eloquence. I never thought I'd see her again, and certainly not here." The room shifted. Eyes that once saw only a waitress now looked again and saw a scholar, a visionary, a woman of quiet power. Preston Whitman's smirk dissolved into silence. For the first time, The billionaire was left speechless, not by insult, but by truth. That night didn't end with applause alone. Madame Delphine Martin, the restaurant's elegant owner, who had watched everything from a distance, approached Ava privately. With warmth in her eyes, she asked if Ava would step in as interpreter for an exclusive international dinner, being held that very evening. Ava, stunned but composed, accepted. Wearing a simple evening gown, her hair swept up, Ava entered the VIP room and seamlessly interpreted complex discussions in French, Italian, and Spanish. But more than that, she bridged cultures, clarified misunderstandings, and brought the room to life with meaning. Guests were enchanted. One Italian diplomat exclaimed, "She's not just translating, she's conducting diplomacy." Word of her performance spread fast. Within days, Ava's name appeared in business journals, social media forums, and even cultural magazines. Clients began requesting her by name. Delphine, recognizing what Ava represented, offered her a new position, Director of Language and Cultural Affairs, as Maison Belle prepared to expand into Europe. And Ava? She accepted, with pride, not apology. Meanwhile, Preston Whitman felt the consequences of his arrogance. When news of his treatment of Ava reached his French business partners, he lost a multi-million-dollar contract. Behind closed doors, his reputation shattered. He tried to issue apologies, but it was too late. Respect is not begged, it's earned. Back in her modest Brooklyn apartment, Ava sat with Naomi, no longer just her younger sister, but her greatest reason. Naomi smiled and whispered, "They finally see you, Ava." Ava returned the smile. "Maybe, but what matters most is that I see me." And I never stopped. Because Ava's story isn't just about vindication. It's about choice, resilience, and the kind of power that doesn't need a spotlight to shine. She gave up her dream for family, but in doing so, became someone even greater. And now, the world knows her name. The laughter wasn't kind. It echoed off the marble walls of Maison Belle like a weapon, cold, polished, meant to wound. Ava Coleman, the black waitress in a spotless uniform, stood still as Preston Whitman, Billionaire CEO, with a smirk sharp enough to cut, deliberately, mispronounced another French dish for entertainment. His audience, executives and investors, mostly white and drunk on ego, burst into laughter. "Confit de l'orange," Preston drawled smugly, waving the menu. "You'll figure it out, won't you, little server?" Ava didn't flinch. "Confit de canard. L'orange, sir," she replied, her French soft, flawless. And just like that, the laughter died. But Ava didn't walk away triumphant. She walked away quietly, head high, chest tight, heart burning. Not because she was ashamed, because she wasn't, but because she knew this wasn't new. It never was. She'd faced this before, many times. People seeing only her uniform, not her mind. Only her skin, not her story. What Preston didn't know was that Ava Coleman once stood on the stage of the Geneva Forum on Multilingual Diplomacy, speaking to hundreds about the power of language to bridge cultures. That she had studied at Sciences Po Paris, respected by some of the greatest minds in international relations. That she once dreamed of working at the United Nations. And yet here she was, correcting French pronunciations between plates of duck and red wine. Why? Because Ava had left everything behind when her parents died. She returned from Paris to Brooklyn to raise her little sister Naomi. Gave up a degree, a career, a future. So her sister wouldn't be alone. Every night since, she'd returned from work, feet sore, heart heavy, and opened her language textbooks to keep the dream alive, even in silence. That night at Maison Belle, after the quiet correction and the mocking applause, Ava retreated, behind the kitchen doors. There, Jake, a new white server who had seen it all, whispered with anger. Why didn't you say something? You could have destroyed him. Ava's answer was quiet but firm. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. But fate had other plans. Among the guests that night was Jacques Moreau, a French investor, who had been at Geneva years ago. He recognized Ava instantly. "Excuse me," he called out, silencing the entire dining room. "Are you Ava Coleman, the speaker from Geneva?" Ava hesitated. "Yes." Jacques stood, raising his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to correct a great misunderstanding. This young woman is not a mere waitress. She is one of the most articulate, insightful voices I've ever heard in international dialogue. Fluent in multiple languages. A student of diplomacy. And tonight, a lesson in dignity." Gasps spread across the table. Even Preston paled. In that moment, Ava's years of quiet strength turned into a roar, without her ever raising her voice. The restaurant's owner, Madame Delphine Martin, witnessed the moment. She approached Ava backstage and asked, "Would you be willing to interpret for our international networking event tonight?" Our translator canceled. Ava nodded. "It would be my honor." In an elegant evening dress borrowed from the back office, Ava walked into the VIP salon that night, not as a waitress, but as a cultural bridge. Her voice smooth, intelligent, commanding, carried across French, Italian, and Spanish with effortless grace. Diplomats listened. Executives leaned in. Even those who once mocked her were spellbound. Preston Whitman, watching from the back, said nothing. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. What followed was swift. Praise on social media, articles in international journals, clients requesting Ava by name. Madame Delphine offered Ava a new position, Director of Language and Cultural Training for the restaurant's European expansion. Ava accepted with composure, not surprise. Meanwhile, Preston's world cracked. His French partners canceled a major deal, citing a breach of ethical integrity. In high-level meetings, his name became a liability. One assistant said it plainly, "They don't trust you anymore." Back in Brooklyn, Ava sat beside Naomi, now a high school senior. Naomi smiled. "They see you now, Ava." Ava replied, "That's not what matters. I see myself. That's enough." Because Ava never needed a stage to be powerful. She only needed one moment to show who she was. And when it came, she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She spoke, with poise, with fluency, with the kind of quiet brilliance that can't be ignored. And the world finally listened. The joke wasn't clever. It wasn't even funny. But to Preston Whitman, it was entertainment. As the chandeliers sparkled above the dining room of Maison Belle and violin music floated through the air, Preston, the billionaire CEO, infamous for his arrogance, turned to the elegant black waitress standing at his table. He smiled condescendingly. "You again. Let's see if you've improved since last time. I'll have confit l'orange," or however you say it. The table erupted in laughter. But Ava Coleman didn't flinch. Her pen poised steadily over her order pad. She replied softly, "Confit de canard, l'orange, sire. Excellent choice." There was a pause. Preston's smug grin flickered. The laughter faltered. But Ava didn't linger. She bowed her head politely and walked away. Not with shame, but with dignity. Because what no one at that table knew was this. Ava wasn't just a server. She was a linguist, a scholar, a woman who had once captivated an international forum with her voice. And now, she was quietly preparing for her moment. That moment came just minutes later. From across the table, Jacques Moreau, a respected French investor, stood up slowly. "Excuse me, are you Ava Coleman?" The same Ava Coleman who spoke at the Geneva Forum on multilingual diplomacy. The room fell silent. Ava turned back, surprised. Yes, I am. Jacques' face lit up with recognition and admiration. Ladies and gentlemen, this woman, right here, gave one of the most powerful speeches I've ever heard. She spoke of language not just as communication, but as connection. She was extraordinary. Preston froze. The room shifted. Respect, once directed at him, now flowed toward Ava. Suddenly, the waitress was no longer a background figure. She was the story. The restaurant's owner, Madame Delphine Martin, had been watching. Moments later, she approached Ava with a quiet proposal. Their VIP interpreter had canceled for an international gathering happening tonight. Would Ava step in? Ava nodded calmly. Yes, I'd be honored. When she returned, this time in a sleek navy gown, her natural curls pinned with care, no, one recognized the server from before. She stood before global business leaders, smoothly, switching between French, Spanish, and Italian with clarity and warmth. She didn't just translate words. She translated culture, emotion, intent. An Italian guest whispered, "She doesn't just interpret. She leads the room." Back in the corner, Preston could only watch, silent, humbled, and shrinking. By the end of the night, Ava received a standing ovation from the very people who had once laughed at her. One guest posted a clip of her interpreting on social media. It went viral within hours, and that was only the beginning. By morning, Maison Belle was trending. Articles praised Ava as the linguist waitress who redefined grace. Business clients began requesting her presence for private events. She received invitations to speak at cultural conferences, and Madame Delphine acted fast, offering Ava a new position as head of language and cultural affairs for Maison Belle's upcoming expansion into Paris. Ava accepted, not as a thank you, but as her right. Meanwhile, Preston Whitman's world began to crumble. News of his treatment of Ava reached his French business partners, many of whom had been at Geneva years ago and held Ava in high regard. Within days, Preston lost a multi-million-dollar contract. Then, another. Soon, rumors swirled about investors pulling out. His reputation, once untouchable, was now stained beyond repair. He tried to fix it. He asked his assistant to deliver an apology, but Ava didn't want one. When the assistant showed up at Maison Belle, nervous and sincere, Ava listened with kindness, then said, "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for understanding. And, perhaps, growth." That night, she walked home to her small apartment in Brooklyn, where her younger sister, Naomi, waited on the couch with textbooks scattered around. "They were talking about you at school today," Naomi said, eyes wide with pride. "They said you're famous now." Ava smiled gently. "I'm not famous, Naomi. I'm seen. And that's enough." She sat beside her sister, helping her work through geometry problems, just like she always had, quietly, patiently, lovingly, because for Ava, success was never about revenge. It was about recognition, dignity, and the power of choosing grace, even when you've been underestimated. She had been mocked, she had been dismissed. But in the end, Ava Coleman became the woman no one could forget, and the one they would never again dare to overlook. The second time Preston Whitman walked into Maison Belle, the staff went still. The chandeliers sparkled like nothing had ever happened. But for Ava Coleman, everything had changed. Just a week before, Preston, the arrogant billionaire with a knack for cruelty, had publicly mocked Ava for correcting his French. He turned her intelligence into a punchline. And yet, Ava hadn't flinched. She'd quietly, flawlessly pronounced each dish correctly. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't walked out. But she had been heard. This time, Preston returned with a new entourage, different faces, same ego. He didn't remember names, didn't notice the quiet glances exchanged as he strutted to his favorite table. But Ava did. From her station, she watched him laugh loudly, holding the French menu like a toy. She stepped forward with professional calm. "Good evening," she said gently. "Are you ready to order?" Preston glanced at her, recognizing her instantly. He smiled with deliberate mischief. Well, the language expert returns. "Let's test your skills again, shall we?" He jabbed his finger at the menu. "I'll have this one. Confid Allurange. Or whatever it's supposed to be." Laughter erupted from the table. But Ava, calm as moonlight, responded. "Confit de canard. L'orange, sir. Excellent choice." Silence. It was deafening. Preston's laugh faltered. His companions looked unsure, and just as Ava turned to walk away, a voice from another table called out. "Excuse me," said Jacques Moreau, a prominent French investor known throughout Europe. He stood, adjusting his round spectacles. "Are you Ava Coleman, the speaker from the classed Geneva International Forum?" Ava paused. She didn't expect to be remembered. "Yes," she answered. Gasps and murmurs followed. Jacques looked around the room. She gave one of the most powerful speeches I've ever witnessed, about how language can resolve conflict, build bridges, and change the world. All eyes turned toward Ava, Preston pale. Jacques continued, his tone proud. She was a standout at Sciences Po Paris. Fluent in French, Spanish, Italian, brilliant, humble, inspiring. Suddenly, the joke was over. No one laughed. Preston's face flushed with heat. This time, not from wine. At the back of the room, Madame Delphine Martin, owner of Maison Belle, stepped forward. "Miss Coleman," she said softly, "our interpreter for the VIP event just canceled. Would you be willing to take their place tonight?" Ava didn't hesitate. "Yes, madame. I'd be honored." Within minutes, she returned transformed, not in soul, but in appearance. Her apron gone, replaced by a sleek black gown, her hair swept into an elegant twist. As she stepped into the VIP room, murmurs quieted. She began translating immediately, effortless, poised, precise. She captured tone, nuance, even cultural gestures. Ava didn't just translate, she lifted the conversation. Diplomats and executives leaned in, captivated by the richness of her voice, the command in her presence. An Italian guest whispered, "She's more than an interpreter. She's a cultural force." From the corner, Preston watched, no longer amused, no longer in control. He left quietly, but the world didn't. By morning, Ava's performance had gone viral. A guest had recorded a clip of her speech and posted it to social media with the caption, "Waitress? Number. This woman redefined brilliance." Tonight, news outlets picked it up, business blogs featured her. Cultural forums discussed her journey, from Paris scholar to humble server to headline-making icon. Madame Delphine knew what had to happen next. She met with Ava privately and said, "I want you to become our director of language and culture. You will lead our staff training and represent us as we expand into Europe." Ava blinked, heart full. "Yes," she said, "I would be honored." Meanwhile, in his sleek midtown office, Preston Whitman was unraveling. His Paris partners had seen the viral clip and recognized Ava immediately. They remembered her Geneva speech, and they were furious. "I'm sorry," his assistant reported. "They've terminated the contract. They said your behavior toward Miss Coleman shows a lack of respect for international values. They won't work with you again." Preston stared at the skyline, once a symbol of his power, now indifferent to his fall. He tried to make amends. He sent his assistant to speak to Ava. She listened patiently, then answered, "I don't need his apology. I don't want pity. I want people like him to see. Not just me, but anyone they've dismissed. Anyone they've laughed at." Ava's words were quiet, but they rang louder than any headline. Now, as director at Maison Belle, she led cultural training programs for the staff. Her classes weren't about language alone. They were about dignity, understanding, and connection. The restaurant transformed. Guests felt it. Staff lived it. And Preston? He disappeared from the spotlight. But Ava became the spotlight. Because the joke they made at her expense became the story of their own undoing. And the silence that followed? That was the sound of the world finally listening. Every night, after the last table was cleared and the chandeliers dimmed, Ava Coleman walked home with aching feet and quiet thoughts. Her apron folded neatly in her bag. Her fingers still, smelling faintly of rosemary and truffle butter. But what most people didn't know was that, before Maison Belle, before the title of server, Ava had been something far greater. A brilliant linguist, a scholar, a rising star. Years ago, she had stood beneath the ancient arches of science's Po Paris, debating diplomacy with future ambassadors, dazzling professors with her command of 5 languages. She'd given speeches in Geneva. She was on the verge of being offered a full scholarship to continue her graduate research on language and conflict resolution. And then the call came. Her father had passed away suddenly from a stroke. Just months earlier, her mother had lost her battle with cancer. Her younger sister, Naomi, was just 13. Alone. Afraid. Waiting. Ava didn't think twice. She packed up her life in Paris, said goodbye to dreams of Geneva, and returned to Brooklyn. She became a guardian, a provider, a protector. She took the first job she could get waiting tables at Maison Belle. Her professors had told her she would lead the world someday. Now, she led her sister through math, homework, and grief. Years passed. Ava kept her brilliance hidden beneath a humble uniform. But every night, after Naomi was asleep, she opened her old textbooks, reading aloud in French, Spanish, Italian. She scribbled translations in her worn notebook. She couldn't afford to dream anymore, but she refused to let go of who she was, until one night, fate forced her brilliance into the light. Preston Whitman, a billionaire known for his arrogance, had laughed at her for correcting his French. He'd mispronounced a dish. She'd offered the correct term softly, respectfully, and become the target of mockery. But someone else had been listening. Jacques Moreau, a renowned French investor, recognizing Ava from the Geneva Forum, he stood in front of the entire room and told the truth. Ava Coleman wasn't a waitress. She was a scholar, a gifted speaker, and one of the most inspiring women he'd ever met. The room shifted. Laughter died. Respect bloomed. That night, Madame Delphine Martin, the restaurant's owner, asked Ava to interpret for an emergency international gathering. She stepped into the VIP room, not in her apron, but in an elegant gown, her voice dancing effortlessly between languages. Diplomats and executives were captivated, not just by her words, but by her presence, by her calm, by the strength that doesn't shout but transforms a room. What began as a humiliation became a triumph. The next day, the internet buzzed with her name. Ava Coleman, server turned star. Her speech at the Geneva Forum resurfaced. International clients requested her by name. Madame Delphine moved quickly, offering Ava a new position: Director of Language and Cultural Programs for the restaurant's expansion into Paris. Ava said yes, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had always deserved this seat. Meanwhile, Preston's empire began to crumble. The same Parisian partners who once courted him canceled a multi-million-dollar deal. "We don't work with men who mock women of intellect," they said bluntly. His board grew restless. His name, once gilded, began to rust. A week later, Preston's young assistant, Justin, came to the restaurant, nervous, sweating. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he said to Ava. "He won't come himself. He's too proud, but he regrets it." I hope you can forgive him. Ava looked at him quietly. I don't need an apology, she said. What I need is for people like him to understand. We don't need to scream to be heard. We just need to be seen. That evening, back at home, Naomi looked up from her textbooks and beamed. My teacher said she saw you on the news, she said proudly. She told the whole class, you're a role model. Ava smiled. I'm just someone who kept going, that's all. But it wasn't all. She had shown the world that dignity doesn't wear a name tag, that brilliance doesn't always sit at the head of the table. Sometimes it walks quietly between them, carrying plates and correcting pronunciation with kindness. Now, she stood before a classroom of new hires, leading her first cultural training. Language, she told them, isn't about showing off. It's about understanding. When you choose the right words, you don't just serve food, you serve respect. The staff leaned forward, hanging on every word. Ava had become more than a symbol. She was a mentor, a guide. And across the city, Preston Whitman sat in his corner office. No phone calls, no deals, realizing too late that his empire hadn't fallen because of one mistake. It had fallen because he failed to recognize greatness when it stood right in front of him. Ava had once sacrificed everything for her sister, but in doing so, she became the kind of woman who didn't need validation. She had earned it, and now the world finally knew her name. The last person Ava Coleman expected to see at Maison Belle that afternoon was Justin Hayes, the shy young assistant of Preston Whitman, the billionaire who had once turned her into a public joke. Justin stood awkwardly by the staff entrance, his suit slightly wrinkled, hands wringing, together as if trying to squeeze the nerves out of his fingers. His eyes scanned the hallway until they landed on Ava, who had just finished leading a cultural training session for the Prawners, restaurant's new staff. Ava, Miss Coleman, he said, voice barely above a whisper. May I speak with you for a moment? She gave a polite nod and gestured toward the quiet lounge beside the kitchen. The hallway, usually filled with clinking plates and soft jazz, seemed unusually silent. I came to apologize, Justin began, his eyes dropping, not on behalf of myself, but for Mr. Whitman. He asked me to come because, well, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Ava said nothing. He regrets everything that happened. The mockery, the jokes, especially once he found out who you were, your background, your speech in Geneva, your education. He's ashamed. Justin paused, hoping for a response. But Ava just studied him silently, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, she finally spoke. Justin, she said gently but firmly, do you know why I never reacted that night? Why I didn't lash out, even though I had every right to? He shook his head. Because I've learned something, she continued, her eyes clear and steady. In a room full of people who are laughing at you, silence is often the loudest voice, especially when that silence is filled with truth. Justin looked at her, confused but intrigued. You see, I didn't need to humiliate him back, because I knew who I was. And eventually, so would they. She stood up slowly and crossed the room to stand by the window. Sunlight poured in across her face, highlighting every ounce of strength she'd earned through years of sacrifice. I don't need an apology from a man who only feels sorry because his reputation suffered, she said. What I want, what I've always wanted, is for people like him to look past the apron, the skin color, the accent, and really see the person standing in front of them. Justin's eyes welled with a complicated mix of admiration and regret. You're right, he said, softly. I don't think he truly understood that, but I do now. Ava turned, her voice still calm. Then take that lesson with you. Let it change how you treat others. That's the only apology I'll ever need. Justin nodded solemnly, then quietly left the restaurant. But Ava knew something had shifted, not just in him, but in the larger world that had tried to keep her invisible. That evening, as she returned to her modest apartment in Brooklyn, Ava found Naomi her younger sister waiting on the couch, surrounded by books and half-finished homework. "You look tired," Naomi said, setting her notes aside. "Just a long day." Ava smiled, dropping her bag beside the door. There was a pause. Then Naomi asked, "Did he ever apologize?" Ava paused. "Not directly." Naomi frowned. "So what did you say?" Ava walked to the window, looking out at the shimmering city lights. Then she turned back to her sister and said simply, "That I don't need apologies. I need change." Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "You're stronger than anyone I know." Ava sat beside her, brushing back a curl from Naomi's face. "I'm not strong because I've never been hurt. I'm strong because I kept going despite it." Over the next few days, word spread of Ava's quiet refusal to accept hollow apologies. It resonated in staff meetings, in kitchens, in office corridors. She became more than a symbol of resilience. She became a standard for what it looked like to lead with dignity. At Maison Belle, her training sessions expanded. New employees learned not just how to serve food, but how to serve respect. She taught them the power of language, the importance of tone, the weight of empathy. And in quiet corners of the restaurant, employees would whisper her name with admiration. Ava Coleman, the woman who endured public humiliation and responded not with bitterness, but with clarity, purpose, and unshakable identity. Meanwhile, in his penthouse office, Preston Whitman remained silent, watching his empire shrink, watching partnerships dissolve, watching the world shift its attention, not to wealth or power, but to character. He never mustered the courage to speak to Ava himself. But deep down, he knew that the moment he dismissed her, he lost more than just a business deal. He lost the right to be heard. Because Ava didn't just rise above the mockery, she redefined what true power looks like. And when the world listened, it was not because she demanded it. It was because her silence left no room for denial, and her dignity spoke louder than anything he had ever said. In the heart of Maison Belle, as the final course was served under golden chandeliers, Ava Coleman stood tall in a pale blue dress, her voice gliding effortlessly in French as she introduced each dish with poise and beauty. Among the diners sat a little girl with golden curls, eyes wide with wonder. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Who is she?" "She speaks like a princess." Her mother smiled gently. "She's more than a princess, sweetheart. She's a woman of knowledge, dignity, and courage. You don't need a crown to be royalty. Only a kind heart and strength like hers." Those words reached Ava's ears as she passed by. For a moment, her heart swelled. All the black, long nights, silent sacrifices, and humiliations she had endured suddenly felt worth it. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not to the child, not to the world, and more importantly, not to herself. Your worth isn't determined by titles, uniforms, or how others label you. It's defined by the light you carry, the dignity you protect, and the kindness you show. Even in silence, your strength speaks louder than any insult. If Ava's story touched you, share your thoughts in the Pride Expribly comments. Have you ever felt unseen but kept going anyway? We'd love to hear your voice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the so you never miss a story that reminds you. You don't need to be recognized to be powerful, just brave enough to stay true to who you are.